Who is Colombia's new president, Gustavo Petro? Well, he's a 62-year-old ex-leftist, guerrilla-turned-mayor-turned-opposition leader who rode a wave of voter anger to a victory over a populist construction magnate last June. Got all that? Now, when I say young people were key to Petro's victory, I do mean it. There are nearly 9 million Colombian voters today aged 28 or younger, and that's the most in the country's history. It's a quarter of the electorate. In what became known as the, and I quote, national strike, young people led anti-government marches across Colombia last year to protest growing inequality and corruption. That resulted in dozens of deaths, and it dominated news coverage across the country. With 10% annual inflation, a 20% youth unemployment rate, and a 40% poverty rate, the most educated young generation in Colombia's history felt betrayed by decades of failed government policies. And Gustavo Petro promised something very different for all marginalized Colombians. And so, Colombia elected its first leftist president in modern history. For decades, Latin America's longest-standing democracy, that's right, that's Colombia, it's also been one of the region's most conservative. Colombia's violent history with leftist guerrilla groups, such as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, known as the FARC, has meant that the office of the presidency was out of reach for left-leaning candidates. But the tiempos, as they say, they are a-changing. The less violent rebel group that Mr. Petro himself was a part of in his youth demobilized back in 1990, and the FARC signed a historic peace deal with the government in 2016. And all of that paved the way for a viable political left in Colombia. Petro's running mate, Francia Marquez, also made history as the country's first black vice president, which kind of sounds familiar. She brought with her an unprecedented number of Afro-Colombian voters. She's pretty fascinating in her own right. Her environmental activism in the past led to death threats and even a grenade attack in 2019. That's a story for another show. On the night of Petro's victory, flag-draped supporters chanted, "Yes, he could. Yes, he could," and they were riffing on Barack Obama's famous 2008 slogan. But when it comes to Petro keeping his campaign promises, how long can that chant hold true? Depends on how you define could, I suppose. Petro's ambitious social and health and agricultural proposals include free university education, phasing out new oil exploration, the sorts of policies that one former finance minister called economic suicide. Petro plans to finance this social spending by overhauling the country's tax system. He wants to raise taxes on the richest Colombians by 200%. Critics, though, say the rich will just hide their wealth abroad. Maybe the United States. Another big hurdle. While Petro has amassed majorities in Congress, they may not last long, and they don't ensure full support for his policy agenda. If he doesn't prioritize policies, analysts say he risks getting nothing done. Colombia's new government also vowed to formally restart relations with its controversial neighbor to the east, Venezuela, after Colombia severed diplomatic ties in 2019. Now, Petro won't veer anywhere near as far to the left as Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, though his opponents fear exactly that. But let's just say officials in Washington are wary of the warming relations. Speaking of Washington, Petro has vowed to reassess that relationship too, especially on drugs and trade. Colombia has long been the United States' staunchest ally in Latin America, and any meaningful shift in relations would have regional repercussions. But all that said, Petro has claimed there is still plenty of common ground between Bogota and Washington.